As I said in my first video in this little mini-series, the initial runs of Tales of the Jedi are devoted not so much to the main story, but to the introduction of its primary characters. Given that this was the very first Star Wars story that didn't take place during the events of the original trilogy, writer Tom Veitch was determined that you, the reader, would get to know his characters, and more importantly, come to care for them when he finally threw them into the plot proper. But where the first run, Ulic and the Beast Wars, established the character of Ulic Qel-Droma through the plot, the second run would achieve this through pure characterization. Didn't give the first episode a proper introduction, so here's hoping to make up for it. This is Tales of the Jedi Part 2, The Saga of Nomi Sunrider. As I said in the previous episode, Tales of the Jedi had two different writers and multiple artists over the course of its run. But what makes the Saga of Nomi distinct is that while all the other runs had at least one artist for the entire duration, the Saga of Nomi Sunrider has two, Janine Johnston doing issue 1, while David Roach came in to do issues 2 and 3. I wasn't able to find out exactly why Johnston only got one issue, but looking at it, I can't help but think that it might be something to do with the fact that her artwork is not that good. In fact, it's the worst of the entire Tales of the Jedi series. And it's a real shame because in the case of Nomi Sunrider's origin, issue 1 is where all of the plot happens. At the beginning of the story, Nomi Sunrider is the wife of Jedi apprentice Ander Sunrider and the mother of a bouncing baby girl named Vima. And already I feel I have to grind the plot summary to a halt. If you are unfamiliar with Tales of the Jedi and you'd already listened to episode 1, you might have found it a little odd that Ulic Qel-Droma was one of 3 apprentices to Master Arca, whereas in the prequel trilogy, it's made quite clear that a Jedi Knight can only have one apprentice at a time. I didn't mention it then because I wanted to save this particular segue for this episode. Given that this entire series was started in 1993, less than 5 years before The Phantom Menace premiered in theaters and started the prequel trilogy, I think this in particular demonstrates just how different the Jedi Order and Star Wars in general was before and after the prequel trilogy, given that the whole Jedi are not allowed to love thing is a major plot point around which the entire prequel trilogy revolves. But Tales of the Jedi is chronologically thousands of years before the events of the prequels, I hear you say. Why make a song and dance of it now? The answer to that obvious straw man is that mostly I'm not concerned so much about the prequels, but Knights of the Old Republic. Remember, the first KOTOR game was released in 2003, 1 year after Attack of the Clones and 5 years after the conclusion of Tales of the Jedi. Obviously, since at the time of KOTOR's development, the prequels were the big Star Wars thing, for better and for worse, KOTOR 1 took a lot of influence from the films, and the Jedi Order in the game is near identical to the one in the films. The problem is that KOTOR 1 and the events leading up to it, the Mandalorian Wars and the rise of Darth Revan, took place only decades chronologically after Tales of the Jedi. In fact, Dark Horse, realizing this, hurriedly rushed out another comic series, also confusingly named Knights of the Old Republic, to try and explain that this was the result of some drastic reforms. Before the Sith War, the major conflict of Return of the Jedi Order was much looser and its organization was less structured. After the Sith War, these aforementioned reforms centralized it and gave it a more rigid hierarchy, and that these reforms were fully in place by the time of Revan. And now that that incredibly long tangent is over with, back to the story. Jedi apprentice Ander Sunrider is about to deliver some lightsaber crystals to a Jedi master named Thawne, who resides on the planet of Ambria, and he's decided to bring his wife Nomi and their daughter Vima along with him. Mid-journey, they make a brief stopover at a space station, and Ander makes the classic tourist mistake of wandering around with his valuables in plain sight where anyone with nefarious intent can see them. Inevitably, this catches the eye of the local crime lord, Bogga the Hutt, who sends some of his lackeys to try and steal the crystals. The attempt fails, although tragically, the inexperienced Jedi apprentice Ander Sunrider is killed. A distraught Nomi picks up his lightsaber and kills one of the thugs, causing them to run away, and as she cries over Ander's corpse, his Force ghost appears to her, telling her that he will always be with her, that she must go on to Ambria to deliver the crystals, and there let Master Thawne decide her destiny. Eventually, Mother, Daughter, and the caretaker droid arrive at Ambria, and after passing by a lake that practically reeks with the dark side, Nomi meets who she thinks is Master Thawne and his beast of burden. They are suddenly attacked by Bogga the Hutt and his minions, who are still hell-bent on stealing the crystals, but the baddies are swiftly beaten off, and it turns out that the humanoid with the weird head was in fact the Jedi apprentice, Os Willem, and his supposed mount is in fact Jedi Master Thawne, proving that one doesn't need to be a biped to use the Force. That ends issue 1 and pretty much all of the plot of this particular storyline. Yes, the bad guys do come back at the end of chapter 3 for one last grab at the crystals, but otherwise the rest of the story is just Thawne taking Nomi under his wing and teaching her the ways of the Jedi. Most of the story is basically just the training scene from The Empire Strikes Back, complete with its own version of the Dark Side cave. Apparently, Master Thawne traveled to Ambria because the entire planet was steeped in the dark side, and he wished to test himself against it. A pretty risky venture given all the Jedi that have fallen attempting something similar, but apparently Master Thawne was of stronger will than most, and he was able to push back the dark side and confined it to a small lake near his homestead, which he calls Lake Wrath. Thawne himself is actually a pretty interesting character, and some very unusual insights, for a Jedi at least, on the nature of the relationship between the light and the dark. He teaches Nomi that it's not simply enough to know the light. A Jedi must feel the tension between the two sides of the Force, in himself and in the universe. The dark side challenges us. It tests us. It forces us to reach beyond ourselves. It's not that Thawne doesn't oppose the dark side or that he advocates conflict, but he does see it as a means to positive growth and improvement. By facing challenges and trials, you become more, better, as you might say. But this story is supposed to be about Nomi, and it spends a lot of time with her just thinking about the past and the future. In the past, she always stayed behind to look after her daughter, while Ander was off running errands for the Jedi Order. Every time he left, she feared that one day he might never return. After all, the life of a Jedi, even an apprentice Jedi, is not an easy one. This makes the fact that she was actually there to witness his death tragically ironic. But she's as much intimidated by the future as by her past. Thawne predicts that she is destined to become a great Jedi, and in fact Nomi has some talent with the Force, particularly in battle meditation, which she uses to save Vima from some lake monsters by making them fight each other. But Jedi training means learning to use a lightsaber, and lightsabers only remind her of her husband's death and the fact that, however justified, she killed someone else in anger. It's only when Bogga the Hutt sends a group of pirates after the crystals, and Thawne allows himself to be taken prisoner without a fight, that Nomi finally finds the will to pick up a lightsaber and fight back as a Jedi must. The pirates are only there because Bogga caught them messing around in his turf, and basically gave them the choice of either steal the crystals for him or be fed to his flesh-eating pets. Because of course he has flesh-eating pets. He's a Hutt crime lord. It's practically a job requirement. As such, the pirates have weak minds, filled only with greed and fear. Easy for Nomi Sunrider to manipulate with battle meditation so that they turn on each other, and then in the confusion, jump them with her lightsaber and free Master Thawne. She has taken the first step to becoming a true Jedi Knight. And it's just as well, because a little earlier in the story, though only briefly mentioned, Thawne's other apprentice, Os Willem, receives a visit from Tot Donita, one of the apprentices of Arca Jeth and friend of Ulic Qel-Droma. Apparently, there is something going down on Onderon, and Master Arca needs help, which of course ties this story into the final introductory arc of Tales of the Jedi, the Freedon Nad Uprising. The saga of Nomi Sunrider is a pretty good story. It's also a bit slower and more introspective than the average Star Wars story, which I admit might take some getting used to for newcomers. Janine Johnston's art is pretty bad in Chapter 1, but I think the work done by David Roach in Chapters 2 and 3 makes up for it. Though I will admit, it's not just the fact that David Roach is a better quality artist, but his entire style is so different from Johnston's as to be pretty jarring if it's your first time reading it. At least that's how it was for me. Of course, David Dorman's cover art is beautiful as ever, and I already feel like a broken record constantly praising him. And with that, I conclude this video and prepare for part 3 in Tales of the Jedi, the Freedon Nad Uprising. But first, next week I return to the grim darkness of the 41st millennium to talk about the most undervalued, underused, and underrated faction of not only the Eldar, but in all of 40K, the Exodites. Until then.